Hi, Carmen. Welcome to the Radical Therapist podcast.
Hi, Chris. I am so pleased to be here today.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you again and be in conversation with you again. You have been very impactful on me and my practice and how I think about things. You really introduced me to a lot of your work around gender and power and how that plays out in relationships and all of that kind of stuff. And it's been I list you as one of my mentors growing as I was early in the field, and you really helped me get my dissertation done too. So thank you for that.
Well, it was a very interesting dissertation involving some of my students.
Yes, thank you. And I had fun getting to go up to Portland and Lewis and Clark. And maybe that's my first question for you, just for our listeners that might not be familiar with you. Could you maybe just share a little bit about your background and what you're doing now?
Well, I met Chris when I was director of the PhD program in family therapy at Loma Linda University. I started there in about 2000. And prior to that, I had already been studying about non-clinical couples, about how gender and power in particular were being played out in their relationships when I was teaching in other programs. And while at Loma Linda, then I met Douglas Hunegart, and he and I had shared interests in how to apply what I had been learning from research, and Doug and I had, in our different places in the world, had been learning about working with gender and power, mostly at that time from feminist perspectives. And we started doing co-therapy together and invited students to watch. And so the bulk of developing socio-emotional relationship therapy happened while I was there, same time that Chris was there at Loma Linda, and it involved a lot of students, doctoral students, meeting weekly with Doug and I, and we were trying to articulate the how. How do you recognize larger societal factors as they play out in practice, which is what I actually have a degree in sociology. My doctoral degree in family therapy was housed in a sociology department. So that's what my interest has been all my life. And by the time in 2014, I left Loma Linda to move up to Lewis and Clark College, where I was directing a master's program in family therapy, and continued to work with advancing cert there with Lana Kim as a faculty colleague. And we were really then interested in, how do you teach this to beginning therapists? And continued to do research looking at videos of therapy sessions, not only done by Lana and me, but done by new students. And this research in CERT has really been going on in one form or another now for about 20 years, a long time.
Yeah, and you have a new book out, which is titled "A Step-by-Step Guide to Socio-Emotional Relationship Therapy: A Socially Responsible Approach to Clinical Practice." And this isn't your first book on CERT, but it's a new one where I think you're trying to synthesize, the hard part. How does the practice look, right? And maybe, maybe my question now is, how does CERT differ from other forms of couples therapy or relationship counseling? How would you characterize it as different or unique and that kind of thing?
Well, I think, today, most therapists know that the larger context affects their clients. That's not new news.
Yeah.
But most models, there is the model, and then you somehow, after the fact, try to figure out how what you were seeing connects to the larger social context. And what CERT does that is different is it begins with a focus on the social construction processes that happen in therapy and how these are not neutral. I mean, they can't be.
Right.
What therapists do matters, and a commitment to the part that we bring as therapists, to not trying to tell people how they should run their lives, but being accountable about what we bring. And so we bring an intentional awareness about power processes in the larger society and how those affect power processes within relationships, either with partners or as the family or couple individual is trying to has to negotiate in the world around them. And surprisingly, for all our talk about egalitarianism in recent decades, most people don't have a model of what it would actually mean to relate to another person, to relate to their partner or partners from an equal position, particularly an equal position. I guess what we mean by that in CERT is that each person is equally able to feel felt by the other person, to belong, not only with each other, but in society, to have an impact on their world around them and have an impact on the relationship. And so I think CERT differs in that we bring that, we're very intentional about how we position the work that we're doing as therapists, being aware of this larger context, and then being intentional about bringing a model that we are organizing our understanding by of what it might mean to relate from a more equal position. What that looks like in particular people's lives could vary a lot. It's not a set of skills that we teach. It's a way of orienting to one another.
Yeah, and maybe that's my next question. You talk in the book, you kind of have some phase 1 tasks and phase 2 tasks, and phase 3, which is position, interrupt, and practice. And you talked about being intentional. I'm wondering, how are you pretty explicit when you go into the work about your positioning and intention?
One of the things, Chris, you and I both collaborated with Justine Dragio, when she studied how therapists who are interested in social justice issues,
right,
how do they do that,
right,
and still work from a collaborative perspective,
right.
And what I remember, and what really stuck with me from that study, is that everybody that she interviewed was transparent about what they do.
Yeah.
And so rather than therapy being this, like, I have these ideas about what's right or wrong, or what's healthy or not healthy, and I'm the expert, and I have that in the back of my mind, but I'm not telling you. I think socially responsible practice, of which CERT tries to be an exemplar, but it's certainly, we're not the only people who are trying to do this kind of work, begins with believing that therapists have to also approach their clients respectfully and openly, and so in a simple way, I always start, one of the very first things I say to clients is that I work from a perspective that believes a relationship should mutually support each partner. Is that something you agree with?
Mm.
And I've never had anyone say no to that. I mean, that's a pretty, from sociology, we know that reciprocity is a social norm that people pretty universally, almost automatically believe in. And then also when we introduce, if I introduce an idea into therapy about, how something might be connected to the larger social context, first of all, it's always related to what people are telling me right there in the room, or what they're doing right there in the moment. It's not a lecture from on high somewhere.
Right. Okay.
And then it's not only my being transparent, but it's helping for clients to start to see what's been invisible to them, because most of us don't realize all the ways, we think of ourselves as pretty individual. We don't realize all the ways that the larger society, both in terms of social structures that shape who's important, what ideas matter, and then the social discourses that are sort of reciprocally related to that. So I hope, as if people read, the book is full of in-depth case examples. I
and
hope
transcripts
of therapy, yes. I hope that what comes through is that the therapist is always co-creating in a pretty clear way about here's what I'm, the therapist would be saying something about, I'm seeing this, or I'm wondering about this. What do you think about that? But it's not like a secretive process, or even a really prescriptive, like I'm the expert process. It's much more about really the therapist being accountable for what they are bringing to the possibilities that are able to emerge in the course of the therapeutic conversation.
When you were, I'm just curious, when you were developing this, was there some response? You were in the smack of the affective turn in therapy, right? Where emotions started to become important and these kinds of things. But did you also notice that there was something missing in that people were not looking at the larger social cultural context that they were in, and some of these more emotionally focused therapies were missing something?
Still often are.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, one of the gifts of having the time to put all the pieces together, like I did in this recent volume, is going back and rereading a lot of the things that had informed me then. I'd even see my own underlinings in the books, and reading new things, of course, since then. And I think it's been like silos. So some people emphasize discourse, some people emphasize emotion. Some people who emphasize discourse say you can't deal with emotion, that gets people all off course or something, and the emotion people would say the same thing. Then there's the people who look at behavior. Right from the beginning, as a research team, Doug and I and all the various students who were participating in it, one of the first things we did, because we were systematically studying, well, what is it that we're actually doing? We'd watch a video, we'd watch a live session that one of us, or often a couple of people, would be in the room, And the first thing that we noticed in the very few months is that we were dealing with all of those things.
Mm.
We were dealing with emotion, we were dealing with interaction patterns, we were dealing with discourse, and tying all those things together really, at least in our early thinking about it, was power. And that often mostly is ignored in the therapeutic, in other models. And so CERT integrates so much from so many models. And as you say, that I was reading a lot of Daniel Siegel at the time that we were starting to systematically study CERT in 2008. And one of my colleagues that I think Naveen Jonathan, he was my research assistant, and he did a huge study where he interviewed 40 same-sex couples, 20 20 men and partners with men and 20 partners with women, couples. And we were trying to understand, how do couples organize their relationships when they're not organizing around gender difference? Mm-hmm. And what Naveen found, what he wrote about, was how important it was to each of them to attune to each other. And so this whole idea of attunement that is so central to CERT, in some ways came from attunement as a concept that Siegel was writing about, that Naveen used, and I was mentoring his research. Mm-hmm. We used to really explain in happening what people did when they were trying to make relationships without having, the old stereotypic models based on gender differences to guide them. And it was about wanting to be in connection with each other, wanting to attune. They didn't always do it perfectly, sure. But that was what was, when they talked about their relationships, these were long-term couples, that was what was motivating them. And that became very central to CERT. It's about emotion, but it's not just about emotional expression. It's this idea of feeling felt, like your partner gets you, and clinically that your therapist gets you. And that's more than a cognitive thing. It's also a mirror neuron, that you're letting your own body take in and feel a client's experience.
Wonderful. As I understand it, relational ethics is central to CERT, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate on this concept and how it influences your approach.
I discovered Ivan Bazamany-Naj's work when I was in my own doctoral program in the 80s, and he wrote about relational ethics, and that is the idea that people have an ethical contract in the reciprocal give and take with one another, parents to children, couple, partner, and in the larger society as well. That's what the kind of foundations of just human relationships are. And his was the only model that I had seen that really brought this ethical component of how we relate to each other. And so that was something that I brought as we were starting to develop CERT, was this real interest in, I think it relates to anyone who's interested in socially just practices and at the time feminist practices and such. And so in Naj's model, a lot of it is also passed down from one generation to another, but it's like when people don't treat each or experience justice and fairness in in what they get from each other in sort of basic human care. Then they enter relationships either entitled to more than their share or not expecting as much as their share. And that gets very related to power dynamics then, and how all that is playing out. And also a commitment that comes along from Naja's idea of relational ethics is it's ethics that what we are doing in this moment, being accountable for the impact on the next generation. And so whether they're our own children or whether it's more broad than that in the world around that. So it's a shift away from such an individualistic, self-focused view of therapy. Which is another aspect of what's unique about CERT. Family therapy in general is focused on relationships. And I think in recent years, especially working with Lana Kim, we become more and more aware in CERT about how we in the Western world, in the US here and in other Western focused countries, the society works against relationship. It is the societal discourse minimizes relational values, what we view as a good, strong, competent person leader are things that we tend to equate with autonomy, competition, being able to get people to do things, as opposed to valuing empathy, attunement to others, responsibility to others, caring, things that historically are labeled feminine, but then what's labeled feminine has also been minimized and devalued. So this individual focus is problematic for anybody who cares about relationships. And in my experience, there are a few exceptions, but most people who actually come to therapy, they have relational values. They care about them, but they have, using kind of a narrative framework, those stories about relationship have not been thickened. Right. There's so many competing stories about what's important and what matters that it's hard for people to really operate out of a relational center.
That's great. Okay, the field of family therapy and relationship counseling is constantly evolving, and I'm wondering how you see CERT evolving and in the future, and what are maybe some of the challenges out there that you see for couples. And you just spoke about some of them, about this holistic discourse that we're always up against.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about therapy, systemic therapy, relational therapies, as maybe the hope for our society, not just therapies, but that way of thinking. What do we have to do to make that happen when the places that we work, the whole society is so organized around such individualistic things, what it means to be professionals organized that way. And I think, I don't know if you've seen this, but in the last year, the current Surgeon General,
loneliness epidemic.
Yes, the loneliness epidemic. When you read that through, he's calling for a interventions on us, whether it's policies or practices that help people be more relational, help our society be more organized in a more relational kind of way. And so in that broad context, I think that's the overall challenge, and that CERT would be one of the, the work that we've been doing is one that helps to think, how do we really, what do we have to do to go about creating change? And as you alluded to earlier, about 20 years ago, we started integrating a lot about emotion into that and valuing emotion. We also, a little before that, started understanding about discourses and narrative therapy and other postmodern approaches. And what's coming together now, or at least what came together for me, because reading all these different things in order to put all the pieces together, is how do we actually create change? From some of the neurobiological insights that are now being incorporated into some of the narrative models, like Jeff Zimmerman's work and such, help us understand that for a new story or a new idea about, let's say, how to relate relationally, to really take hold in a person's life, it's not something we can just do by individually reflecting on it. That might be a part of the process, but we have to have focused attention, ideally with someone else. Now, that someone could be a therapist, but in family therapy world, it's much better if it's your significant others, your family members, colleagues, and then that there has to be an affective component to that people have to feel it, feel what's emotionally salient to them. Emotional meaning meaningful. So the distinction between thought and emotion is another change that's very important in CERT and is in part of the broader field. So Murray Bowen, famously said we had to separate thinking and feeling. And
right.
But that was like, how many years ago? I don't know, 60 years ago or something. But now we know new folks who are studying how thinking and how cognition and affective processes, emotion work together, know that you really can't disentangle these even. They're so interconnected. So talking about meaning as both cognitive and emotive is helpful to me. And so I think in terms of where the field is going, to the extent that other people besides me and CERT people who are practicing CERT are learning how to put all these pieces together. And I really do think that's what this new book is, what I'm so excited about, because on one hand, a lot of these they're certainly not new to me, and I didn't create, and the CERT team didn't create these ideas ourselves, but having the chance to really put all these pieces together in context of how are we being accountable for what can happen potentially in the therapy room, I think that's new. And whether the field as a whole moves in that direction, I'm a little hopeful because despite the current political divides, there is a lot of awareness about needing to not just see people's problems as within them. We have to look at larger patterns of who's suffering depression, who's anxious, what causes, how are those things related to the larger context. And I think what's one of the good things about CERT is that while it can be a standalone model, I mean, those of us who identify that that's our model, we integrate other things into it, but it can
Yeah.
be used as kind of an umbrella um, with or any model. And I was I, I'm also now working on a workbook for couples, and I'm being invited in that process to think about how to explain these things in ways that might, while this would complement therapy, might also extend beyond therapy to other settings, and people using it for their own awareness in a way that's, it's political with a small p, and then it is about who's valued in society and whose voice is viewed as critical, but in a way that's not political in the larger in the world of politics. And it's an interesting challenge, but I think I don't think people have models and language for how to talk about these things that are so core to nearly all of us.
All right. Well, we look forward to that workbook. Okay, a couple more questions. I guess I should ask, because I have a lot of listeners who are in graduate programs or, kind of starting out. And what advice would you offer to these folks who are interested in incorporating certain principles and practices? And are there other books and resources, that kind of thing?
Well, the new book, a step-by-step guide to socio-emotional relationship therapy.
And I will provide a link to the listeners.
Okay. I was just talking to Jessica Chen Feng, or I guess I was talking to Lana Kim, who had been talking to Jessica Chen Feng, but who was all part of the original CERT team and who teaches a practicum now in CERT at Fuller University. Jessica does. She said this is where all the information is in one place, since it's so current. So there's all kinds of sources, of course, listed in there, every one of them, but someone whose work is so related and important is Olga Smoliak, S-M-O. I know I can't spell out loud. S-M-O. Well, Smoliak. I can't spell it right now. She and her team do studies where they're looking at the discourses that are being constructed in therapy sessions. And just in the last few years, she's published amazing ones. Look, one, for example, looks at, they're all cited in the book here, but one looks at how discourses of masculinity are becoming soft, in that it's okay for men to be more expressive, more vulnerable, but how the male dominance aspect is still embedded in. Another looked at a session on, a public session on that training session on EFT, and showed all the ways that the responsibility was unintentionally being put on the woman, like saying that he wasn't attentive to her because she hadn't explained herself well enough, and things like that. So Olga's work, it is such a good example of just looking for the complexity and the nuances, because if we talk about broad social patterns, they're too abstract. So we need to know what it looks like in the moment by moment of practice. So that's a source that I would look at. I think we can learn from so many things. That this Margaret Weatherall who did a book 2014, maybe it was 2012, on affect and emotion from a more of a social constructionist point of view.
I actually think I have that book. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, that was, it's a little, it's not clinical.
Right.
So it's a little more heady. But if you're really interested in those foundations, that's a really, that I keep going back to that book all the time.
I think you were recommended that book to me a while back, and
I might have.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But seeing how people like Jeff Zimmerman and so many other narrative therapists are also starting to incorporate, looking at their work. They don't necessarily always directly bring in the larger societal context piece. Sometimes they do, but seeing, I think seeing how to actually do the work. For me, in terms of writing this book, the chapter where I learned the most was on the part writing phase 3 on practicing, because that's the part I hadn't written about before very much, but it is about how do we make this stuff stick. And I was drawing on so many other people. And so I think the other advice I would give, besides what to read, is to look at your own. I mean, you have to study practice, study your own practice, watch it. And you need a either supervision that is focusing on helping you be accountable for what you're bringing to therapy, and how therapy is either reinforcing societal power differences by telling people that they're just not organized enough, or they need to be more goal directed, or whatever it is. You need to have supervision or your own peer group. It's hard to do this on your own.
All right.
So those would be some of my suggestions.
Wonderful. And finally, the last question I always like to ask all my guests, and that is, what books, thinkers, ideas, films, music, what's capturing your attention these days, Carmen?
I think I've probably mentioned most of them already. So I don't know if I have much to add there. I do think the Surgeon General's advisory on the epidemic of loneliness, I think is worth reading.
Yeah. Because
it summarizes in a pretty simple language these broader societal processes. The truth is, I can find almost everything helpful to read. Third order change is, I was a part of another book, Socioculturally Attuned Family Therapy, with Teresa McDowell and Maria Bermudez. And Teresa drew on other disciplines that were expanding on Bateson's concepts of the different levels of thinking. So in family therapy, we talk about first order change, second order change. Right. Yeah. But this whole idea of third order change being about, it's similar to raising consciousness, but seeing how the systems that we're in now aren't the only possible systems that there are. And so anything that helps us expand our awareness about possibilities, about how we are often automatically replicating ideas and patterns that we took in without realizing it.
Right.
So that we have found, Teresa, Maria, and I, that people in family therapy just captured, that they resonated with the idea of third order change so much. And so I think that's another direction that I would, it was I'm a
Yeah.
co-author on it, but it's really new to me. It was Teresa's. Teresa brought that.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to do some research on that myself. So thank you for that. All right, Carmen, it's been wonderful to be in conversation with you again. You know, one of my favorite things was to be in class with you, and there would be like 8 of us, and we would just be sitting around for a couple hours just having a conversation about maybe a particular article or a particular idea or something like that. And it was just really, really informative and influential to me. So I
And
appreciate that. And I
and
appreciate you.
thank you. One of the ideas that I took from you,
Hmm.
I don't know that you ever published this paper, but you were working on a paper about experience near
Hmm.
um, practices and narrative therapy.
Hmm.
And if you read closely this new book, it's really always about being experience near. And that was a term you didn't make it up, but I learned I got that from my conversations with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for making the time. Listeners, the link to the book will be in the show notes. Please go support the work. And Carmen, it's just been wonderful. Thank you.
It's good seeing you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Don't leave yet. Okay, I just have to save this. Okay. Can you send me an image and a bio that you would like me to use?
Oh, sure.
So I can do that'll be for the introduction. And then my plan is to launch it on the 2nd, Tuesday the 2nd, after the New Year's break. And I will send you a
Okay.
link when it's up so you have it. And I will keep you posted on any feedback. So,
Well, thank you so much.
yeah, thanks, Carmen.
It's writing a book like this. I I learned I learned so I learned so much.
I mean, how long did it take you? This is a lot.
Oh yeah, a
But you're a
year
good
and a half,
writer. You're
a
not
year
gonna,
and a half. Oh, it's good because everything was edited about 40 times.
no. Right. Gotta love
So
our editors. Yep.
that's right.
Okay.
All right. Well, nice seeing you. Thank you for
Yes.
the opportunity.
And Happy New Year, and I'll be in touch.
All righty. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Carmen.
Bye bye.